The creepiest things serial killers ever said. Peter K. was a German serial killer who was active during the early 1900s. According to Murderpedia, he started killing as a child when he pushed a friend off of a raft and then drowned the boy's would-be rescuer. He was later cleared of both deaths because no one thought a 9-year-old could possibly be that evil. As an adult, he murdered at least 9 people, many of them children. The German press nicknamed him the Vampire of Dusseldorf, based on police conjecture that he might be drinking the blood of his victims. It only took a jury 90 minutes to convict Curtin of his crimes, and he got 9 death sentences for his trouble. Fortunately for his victims, most people can be killed only one time, but his method of execution was what prompted his infamously creepy quote. "Tell me," he asked the prison psychologist just before his execution by guillotine. "After my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck?" Evidently unfazed by this super weird question, the psychiatrist told him there was a good chance his ears and brain would still work for a couple of seconds, and Curtin replied, "That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." Jane Topon. Jane Topon liked to keep her hands clean when she killed. Her murder weapon of choice was morphine, and she exclusively murdered people who couldn't fight back. Not that that makes her any worse than any of the other world's serial killers, but there is a special place in hell for people who kill the helpless. Topon's first victims, in 1885, were patients she was caring for as a resident nurse at Cambridge Hospital. According to All That's Interesting, that's where she developed an affinity for giving people high doses of painkillers just to see what would happen. No one seemed to notice. In fact, at the end of her tenure she was congratulated for being an excellent nurse and sent off to work at Massachusetts General Hospital. She experimented on a few more patients at her new post before being fired. Never mind, though, because then went on to become a private nurse, so it's not like poisoning people damaged her career or anything. Subsequent murders included an entire family and her own foster sister before someone finally caught on to what she was doing. Her creepiest quote, "That is my ambition, to have killed more people, more helpless people, than any man or woman who has ever lived." Though some people think she may have killed up to 70 people, Colombian serial killer Luis Garavito may have killed up to 300, most of them street kids. H. Holmes. This dude was such a depraved killer that he built an entire hotel just so he could kill people in it. Eat your heart out, Norman Bates. H. Holmes built his terrifying hotel in the 1890s. According to Bizarropedia, he had to keep swapping in new construction workers and firing the old ones so no one would catch on to the fact that he was actually building a murder dungeon. Only the 3rd floor was meant to be an actual hotel. The 2nd floor and the basement were a maze of secret rooms, chutes, and fake elevators complete with gas lines, blow torches, and various other torture devices. The place also included vats of quicklime, acid, and furnaces that could be used to dispose of the evidence. Holmes was kind of a unique sort of serial killer because he made a whole business out of killing people. It wasn't just the part where he had all his employees take out life insurance policies that listed him as the beneficiary. That's a pretty tired serial killer trope these days. He also broke down the bodies of his victims so he could sell their organs and bones. During his trial, Holmes literally excused himself with "the devil made me do it" quote. "I was born with the devil in me," he said. "I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing." Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was one of the 20th century's most infamous serial killers. Evidently, he didn't really even like killing all that much, he just did it to get people to hang out with him. Sort of. According to biography, Dahmer killed 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. He usually drugged them, then strangled them, then cut them up into pieces for easy disposal. He often photographed his murders in progress and sometimes ate parts of his victims. Dahmer is famous for telling a Dateline reporter, Leah Oxygen, that although he disliked killing people, turning them into zombies was totally cool. "The killing was a means to an end," he said. "That was the least satisfactory part. I didn't enjoy doing that. That's why I tried to create living zombies, but it never worked. No, the killing was not the objective. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control, not having to consider their wishes, being able to keep them there as long as I wanted." Incidentally, Dahmer was killed by a fellow prisoner in 1994 because of his habit of making severed limb art out of prison food. You know, Just to freak everybody out. Carl Panzram. Carl Panzram killed at least 21 people, probably committed thousands of robberies, and was fond of burning down buildings. According to All That's Interesting, he was evidently also quite good at escaping from prison, or else prisons just had very sucky security in those days because he escaped from the Oregon State Penitentiary not once, but twice. After his second escape, he decided to spend his newfound freedom killing people on the yacht he owned for some weirdly inexplicable reason. After his yacht sank, he moved to Africa, killed some people there, then moved back to America where he killed more people. He was finally sent to prison in 1928, but not for murder, for robbery. In prison, he killed someone else, and only then did it occur to anyone that he should maybe be tried for murder. Even though he was clearly a depraved psychopath, Panzram evidently did not think he needed to be reformed. Other people, though, well, evidently everyone he killed had it coming, including the children. He apparently only killed them so they would become better citizens. I believe the only way to reform people is to kill them, he said. Panzram was executed by hanging in 1930. His last words were to the executioner, "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around." Richard Ramirez. Nicknamed the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez killed at least 14 people between 1984 and 1985. While many serial killers leave weeks or months or even years between killings, Ramirez killed frequently. His most prolific spree was 5 attacks in 10 days, though one victim was lucky enough to survive. According to CBS, Ramirez was an equal opportunity killer. He attacked men, women, and kids and used knives and guns, whatever was handy. He didn't always kill everyone he attacked, either. When he was finally apprehended, it became clear that he wasn't just a psychopath, he was also kind of a well-spoken psychopath, though the well-spoken things he said were always super terrifying. Among them, the infamous killer had this to say: "We've all got the power in our hands to kill, but most people are afraid to use it. The ones who aren't afraid, control life itself." Also, just after his death sentence was handed down, he said, "Big deal. Death always comes with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." Jokes on him cause death row inmates don't usually get field trips to Disneyland. He did manage to avoid the executioner, though. Ramirez died from lymphoma in prison in 2013. Albert Fish. Back in the old days, serial killers were extra super terrifying because forensic science stank, and it was impossibly easy for them to keep getting away with the horrible things they were doing. One great example of this is Albert Fish, who murdered 23 children between 1910 and 1930, some of whom he dismembered and ate. According to Thought Co., the werewolf of Wisteria was eventually undone by a letter he wrote to the mother of one of his victims, describing the death of her 6-year-old daughter in gruesome detail. After he was apprehended, he claimed he'd been told to kill by the voice of God because, evidently, God thinks eating small children for breakfast is totally cool. Serial killers do love to say weird things about their own upcoming deaths, and Albert Fish's most notorious quote was supposedly spoken as he was being strapped into the electric chair: "What a thrill that will be if I have to die in the electric chair. It will be the supreme thrill. The only one I haven't tried." Sadly, Thought Co. doesn't think he really said this, so we'll just have to pretend like he did. Another quote attributed to Albert Fish: "I like children. They are tasty. Let's just leave that one there." John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy is unique amongst serial killers because he was a murderer and also a clown with the delightful stage name Pogo. He probably didn't murder anyone while actually wearing the clown costume, but you never know. It's not like he left any witnesses. According to the Chicago Tribune, Gacy tortured and killed 33 men and boys between 1972 and 1978 and buried many of them in his own crawl space, so as not to make it obvious. Police suspected Gacy for a while before they finally got enough evidence to arrest him. Evidently, he was kind of a conspicuous suspect because he was known for having parties and inviting a lot of teenage boys to his house, and mostly not killing them. Like many serial killers, Gacy didn't think he was going to get caught and was brazen enough that he even invited the 2 cops who were tailing him out to breakfast one morning. He told them about his exploits as a single guy and his job as a clown at children's parties and then leaned in and said, "Clowns can get away with murder." So that's creepy, but Gacy was so very brazen that he's also quoted as saying, "All the police are going to get me for is running a funeral parlor without a license." Which, unfortunately for Gacy, did not turn out to be true. He was executed for his crimes on May 10, 1994. Peter Sutcliffe. According to CNN, He was convicted in 1981 after he told a courtroom that he only went on his 5-year killing spree because God told him to. "The women I killed were filth," he said. Charles Manson, Ed Kemper, Samuel Little. Still others are smarter about choosing their victims. Little was such a successful serial killer that he eventually got old enough to retire from serial killing. Albert DeSalvo, Joe Matheny. He opened a roadside barbecue stand, ground his victims up into hamburger meat, mixed them with pork, put them in burgers, and sold them to passers-by. Ted Bundy,